to our first special event for the fall at ACERT. We like to have these whenever possible. Usually we'd obviously be meeting in person and having a lunch or some sort of food or drink together, but today we'll just toast each other virtually. But yeah, I'm very excited, and it's my pleasure to introduce Gina Riley, who is many of you know, is an educational psychologist and clinical professor and program leader in the adolescent special education program at Hunter College. And most importantly for me, she is a faculty fellow at ACERT this year. And you've probably seen her or attended one of her workshops or lunchtime seminars, because she's been doing amazing presentations for us. So we thank her for all her work. Today, though, as many of you know, that's why you're here, she's going to be speaking about her book, Unschooling, Exploring Learning Beyond the Classroom. As we wrote on the ACERT website, and as we were just talking a little bit ago, this is probably the best. There's never been a better time to reimagine of learning and schooling right now. So this is a really good topic for us to talk about. In her book, Gina explores this topic of unschooling, its present and its past and its future. She calls it a type of homeschooling where children and teens learn through life, led by their own intrinsic motivations, strengths, and interests. And as I think Gina will show us today, unschooling can happen in public and private and charter schools if we're willing to rethink our notions of what education and learning really are. So for today's event, like I mentioned, she's going to talk for 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up for Q&A and discussion. And we have the chat, and Gina is facile moving between the chat, and unless you don't want them to add anything in the chat.
Go for it. Chat away.
And then we'll record the whole hour. So thank you very much, Gina, for coming today. I'll hand it over to Professor Gina Riley.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. I just want to, before I start my show, extend gratitude to ACERT, extend gratitude to Paul and Fanny and to everyone. You guys are so amazing to come and spend the hour. I'm going to share the presentation now. And I want to spend this time really rethinking and reimagining what education can look like. For me, this has been so interesting. This increased interest in homeschooling and unschooling has been so interesting. I've been involved in the movement since the late 90s. And so like 2020, it took a pandemic to really find interest in this, and I'm excited about it. So overall, I mean, we've come a long way. As some of you might be home learning with your children at home, you know, interest in home learning has doubled during this pandemic. And so when you previously had about 5% of American families homeschooling, you now have 10% choosing to homeschool. And this does not count the number of families who are home or remote schooling with curriculum coming from the district. So this is just individuals who have chosen to homeschool or unschool their kids. Previously, National Homeschool Association used to get, 5 or 10 calls per day about homeschooling and how to do it and how to register with districts and things like that. And now they're receiving thousands, 3,400 average per day of interested parents really interested in this whole home education. And I think, of course, we're going to see how this number changes and alters or flattens out during the pandemic. But it is clear that, more families are going to choose educational options. And for me, I mean, I teach New York City public school teachers. I love them. I honor the work they're doing. And so for me, homeschooling and unschooling has only always been a choice, right? It's a choice that parents can make and fits in within the realm of public, private, charter schooling as well. So lots of people ask the difference between homeschooling and unschooling. Unschooling is a branch of homeschooling. And so while homeschoolers do school at home and follow a curriculum and maybe take tests that their district requires them to take, unschoolers are primarily learning through everyday life experiences. And those experiences generally match their strengths and their interests and their learning styles. A lot of this talk is going to be about interest and is going to be about intrinsic motivation, because this is really where unschooling sits. Unschooling sits within the realm of educating our children using their interests, their strengths, and their own internal intrinsic motivations. So approximately 20% of all homeschoolers call themselves unschoolers officially. But you'll notice that a lot of people really do, while they're home learning or homeschooling, really do more of the unschooling, right? Really watching their child learn and grow and play. And what sometimes happens is unschoolers start off as homeschoolers registered with the district. And of course, even unschoolers register with a district, but the way they learn becomes looser and freer and more, again, focusing on a child's intrinsic motivations and interests. So unschooling is not a new thing. There's deep historical roots into it, starting with hunter-gatherer cultures. So if anyone's read any of Peter Gray's work, Freedom to Learn, Peter Gray is an evolutionary psychologist at Boston College, you'll find out that he talks a lot about hunter-gatherers and how they learned, learning through play, learning through interest, and learning through cultural transmission. And then you have, a little more like Rousseau, who was really always talked about learning from the natural world and seeing education as natural, simple, and unstructured. Dewey comes in here too, right? The champion of public education, who really said that I believe education is a process of living and not preparation for living. You have school-based unschooling models like Summerhill, a boarding school in England founded by A.S. Neal. And this boarding school focuses on freedom and autonomy for all students. So they get to choose what they're interested in, and they get to choose what they interact with and what subjects they interact with every day. For those of you in the 70s, you might recognize the work of Ivan Illich, right, who wrote Deschooling Society, which was a really big book in the 70s. And it's really interesting to go back and look at his works. He took compulsory public education and really critiqued it and thought about different models of the way education could look. John Holt, right? John Holt is considered the father of unschooling, the author of books like How Children Fail and How Children Learn. And he's really the one in the unschooling movement that finally said, you know what? Kids learn through life. They really do. And if we take off some of these requirements and expectations, they will know and learn what they need to know in every environment. John Taylor Gatto is always interesting. He was a New York City public school teacher, was a New York City public school teacher for 30 years, and then made a huge announcement in the paper and said, you know what, this isn't working for so many ways. He wrote books like Dumbing Us Down and the Underground History of American Education, and really nodded to homeschooling and unschooling as a viable alternative, both in an individual sense as well as a school-based sense. And then my colleague, Peter Gray from Boston College, is a wonderful colleague of mine. We've written a lot together. We've done large scale studies of homeschooling and unschooling, and he is really involved and interested in children's play, the notion of evolutionary schooling, right? And how schooling started and how it is now. So he writes a lot about homeschooling and unschooling, and I'm really proud to call him a really close colleague. So in terms of theoretical perspectives, my work on homeschooling and unschooling really came from my deep interest in intrinsic motivation, and specifically Edward Deci and Richard Ryan from the University of Rochester, their self-determination and cognitive evaluation theories. And I fell in love with this theory, right? Because this is like the theory of intrinsic motivation, the theory of doing what you love and what you're interested in. And I remember reading an article about them in the early 2000s and thinking, oh my gosh, this is what I want. This is what I want from my life. This is what I want from my work. And this is what I want for my kid, right? I always want people to do what they love and what they're interested in, because that interest and passion follows you and it ignites you and it excites you. And I mean, we see this in all of our wonderful colleagues at Hunter College when they teach, right? You see like faces light up, and you see even online and remotely, and you see them talking about their interest and they just grow from there. And it's just an amazing thing to see. So that's where my interest in this field is rooted from. I love unschooling because I love intrinsic motivation and the concept of people and kids being able to do what they love most of the time. And so that focus on intrinsic motivation has really gotten me into a subtheory of Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, which is called cognitive evaluation theory. And some of you may know this theory. I utilize this all the time in my work with teachers. And it's really focusing on three things. Cognitive evaluation theory really focuses on how to facilitate intrinsic motivation in students, right? And you could facilitate it in a public setting, and you could facilitate it in a private setting, and you could facilitate it in a home-based setting. And Deci and Ryan will talk about these three tenets that are so important in the facilitation of intrinsic motivation, which is really the facilitation of people doing things that they love, right? So the first element of cognitive evaluation theory is competence. All kids, all people should be able to know that they are competent and confident. This means they should know their strengths, really know them. This means they should be able to really see, where their interests lie. So the facilitation of competence facilitates intrinsic motivation, because if you know you can do something, if you know you can do it, then you have the courage to go ahead and do that thing, whatever it is, whether it be an interest in science or math or psychology or history, right? So competence is really important when we educate kids. So is facilitating a sense of autonomy. And this is something sometimes in the field of education that scares people, but as an adolescent special educator, I feel really strongly about it. In order to facilitate intrinsic motivation in our students, whether they be at home or at public school, we have to give them a sense of autonomy, a sense of freedom, a sense of choice, right? And even our college students, we know that our college students like when they have choices, in assignments, when they have choices in readings. This allows them to become more interested in the topic at hand. And then finally, there's this concept of relatedness. So in order to facilitate intrinsic motivation, we should always give students and kids a sense of relatedness, or a feeling that someone has their back no matter what. It's like, if you know Carl Rogers and unconditional love, it's sort of like unconditional acceptance, right? We need to give our kids unconditional acceptance. So again, they can go ahead, they can do things, but they could also make mistakes, because part of learning is making mistakes, and then bounce back and learn from those mistakes, because they know that someone is always there to just be like guiding and leading. So again, I come from this realm through competence, autonomy, and relatedness, because I've really always thought that this is the magic of teaching and this is the magic of learning. And you do see this, right? You see this in kids who are in public school, and you see this in kids that are unschooled, and you see this a lot in kids that are unschooled. And I've always thought that the strength of unschooling and the strength of homeschooling comes from this focus on intrinsic motivation, this focus on the realms of competence and autonomy and relatedness. And then of course, within unschooling, you have, a lot of Gardner. I actually once spoke to Howard Gardner about this, and he's like, yeah, Gina, it's really interesting. It's a small population, but you're right, right? The 8 intelligences that Gardner writes about in his book really does. I mean, you see it in unschoolers, you see it in homeschoolers, you see them using a variety of their intelligences and all the different things that they do. So again, I mean, this movement has not come out of nowhere. It has really deep historical and theoretical roots. And those roots are really interesting to examine. So in the past few years, the homeschooling and unschooling realm has just grown. It really has. It's been growing and growing, and the pandemic just gave it attention. Right. So it was once, I mean, when you thought of homeschoolers or unschoolers, you either thought of like the liberal white 2-parent family or the ultra religious 2-parent family. And that's really not what it is, right? There are lots of single parents unschooling. There are lots of Black and Hispanic families unschooling. My friend Akila Richards just wrote a book that's coming out in December that's incredible, that talks about unschooling as part of the educational liberation movement, right? There's an increase of students, poor students unschooling, which I think is interesting. There's an increase in students with special needs unschooling. And some theorists, including Peter Gray, believe that the unschooling environment for some kids with special needs is indeed their least restrictive environment. So there's work being done on that. I am personally doing work on kids with special needs who are also unschooling and studying that realm. Then you have an increase in students who identify as LGBTQ unschooling because of the space it has allowed them to explore concepts like gender and sexuality. And I've written an article on it. It's a really interesting article. It was published in Other Education in the year 2015. And I'm always, again, I'm always so thankful for participants in research because they really do share a lot. So that's an interesting thing to look at. In terms of paths, people come to this from a period of public schooling or private schooling or homeschooling. Basically, they see it's not working, it's not fitting in with their kids and what they want for their kids. And so they go through this period of like, well, maybe I can loosen things a little, and maybe I can allow more exploration of strengths and interests. In the unschooling world, we frequently talk about the concept of deschooling, especially in the part of the parent and guardian. And this just means like when you deschool, you're taking your culturally ingrained thoughts about schooling and education and learning and achievement, and you're sort of like reimagining it, right? You're re-examining it. Are the A's that important? Are the grades that important? What do we really want to get out of students' educations? What do we really want to get out of, teaching and learning? What's the whole goal? And for many people, it's different things, right? It's not always the grade, it's not always the A, although I think most of us who go into academia are high achievers, right? There's something else there though. We want our kids to be happy. We want our kids to learn through life. We want them to be healthy socially, emotionally. And so there's a lot of different perspectives that go into this whole question of what is education, what is schooling. And a lot of unschooling parents do have to do a little deschooling to be like, okay, like it's okay if my kid, is like doesn't do algebra in 9th grade. And it's okay if my kid, might read at a later grade than most kids. And so you sort of have to wrestle with that in your heads. Um, Other people have really, just found out about unschooling through other unschooling families and said, well, this is an idea, and had the courage to try out that idea. Interestingly, Ken Robinson, if you know Ken Robinson's TED Talk, Why Schools Kill Creativity, that TED Talk spurred a movement of people more interested in self-directed learning and the concept of homeschooling and unschooling. So the major criticism of all this, right, is that unschooled students, because they don't go through curriculum by age or by grade, will have gaps in their education as, as a result of not having this well-rounded curriculum. And the truth is that, yeah, unschooled students actually do have gaps in learning. We know this from research, but schooled students do too, right? And so the key is that unschooled kids, because they've spent so much time exploring and because they've spent so much time really focusing in on those strengths and interests, know how to learn. And so when they need to know something, either for like a college class or for taking a specific test, they might have not done it before, but they know how to find it, they know how to do it, they know how to learn it. And I think that's something we look for in our college students as well, right? Like we want them to know where to find information, find viable information. And this is something that unschoolers are really good at. I have interviewed a lot of adult unschoolers for my research. And also I have a podcast called Learning by Living that I do with Dr. Kevin Curry Knight at East Carolina University. And in talking to these young adult unschoolers, you see their experiences are very, very similar to like the experience of Itzi Dismaris, this quote on the PowerPoint. She says, in my teens, I used to worry that I had gaps when compared to my schooled peers. But the older I got, the more apparent it came just how different everyone's skills were. I realized that I was better at some things than some people, and other people were better at other things. I knew more about some subjects and less about others, like all my friends, whether schooled, homeschooled, or unschooled. So again, like these kids don't turn out so differently. In 2013, given our interest in homeschooling and unschooling, Dr. Peter Gray and I from Boston College ended up doing a large-scale study of 232 unschooling families. There's not a lot of data, so this was the first large-scale study ever done on unschooling families. We reviewed some demographic data. If I had to go back, I would review more. We reviewed reasons for unschooling and then the benefits and challenges of unschooling. And so, of course, I want to go through the challenges because I think it's important, right? Like if you're learning about this topic, you need to know like what the barriers are. A lot of our respondents, these unschooling families, 43.5%, felt social stigma and pressure, right? Based on the choice to unschool from others, from people at their jobs, from people at their work, from their families, from their friends, from their neighbors, because it's just not something that all people do, right? So you sort of like hide it and you say, yeah, I homeschool, right? You're not going to mention the word unschooling because that's just a scary word to people. So there is some social pressure going on, and that does affect the way people look at unschooling as a whole, right? People always think of the socialization topic, like how do these kids socialize if they're not in school? And we forget that people socialize in all different ways, right? It's not just school that creates a social arena. It's, your extracurricular activities, your sports, your dance, your music. There's a lot of ways people socialize. The second real barrier was getting rid of those culturally ingrained thoughts with regards to schooling. So in other words, the deschooling. There were time, career, and income effects, which we see in this pandemic, right? Like we see when you have your kids home, there's an effect on career, there's an effect on time, and there's an effect on income. My hope always is that that effect will be mitigated by, the future world where more people can work from home, where people are more entrepreneurial and can allow their kids to be involved in their work. And then, of course, there are legal issues surrounding unschooling. Homeschooling wasn't even legal in all 50 states until the 90s. And so when people start talking about unschooling and learning without a curriculum, many, many people get very nervous. In terms of the benefits, we saw increased student learning. We saw a lot of people like talking about the social emotional benefits that their child was healed through unschooling. 57% mentioned an increase in positive family relationships, And 36% said they love that freedom of schedule, that they didn't have to be on this school calendar that's so prevalent. So it's one thing to like interview families, right? Because mostly people who are going to talk about unschooling are going to talk about all the amazing and wonderful ways that it's fantastic. And so Dr. Gray and I really wanted to know if people were telling the truth. And so we ended up wanting to do a study on unschoolers who are now adults that have gone through this process and how their outcomes were. And I think, to be honest with you, all of us were pretty doubtful. We're like, yeah, the families are probably painting a rosy picture. And then maybe like the unschooled adults, I mean, who knows what happens to them? But the truth is the outcomes were pretty good, right? The kids are good. They turned out fine. 69% reported a good social life, right? And specifically mentioned age mixing. A lot of times you'll hear this concept of age mixing and that benefit when it comes to homeschooling and unschooling. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. So when we think about school-based structures, our kids generally, are with people of the same age and grade for their whole entire day, because that's how we classify and that's how we organize kids in a school-based structure. One of the benefits of homeschooling and unschooling is that kids are with people of all ages all day long. So most homeschoolers and unschoolers are not in their house, right? And I think that's a common stereotype and misconception, that the kids like are at a desk in their house and they're just writing things down, right? Most homeschoolers and unschoolers are out in the world. They have friends of all ages, senior citizens, they have friends at the grocery store, they have friends at the library. And so the age mixing benefits is something big to look at. Many of our adult unschoolers talked about the freedom that they had, the time to pursue interests, again, going back to that intrinsic motivation, the increased self-direction, the increased learning, and the smoother transition to adulthood. And 37% said, nope, there was no disadvantage. I loved my life. Interestingly, and I always think it's important to talk about the people who did not have a good experience. 3 out of 75 reported negative experiences. In all cases, the parent had suffered with mental health issues. And 2 out of 3 said, yeah, I mean, I think if I was in a different family structure, my unschooling experience would have been great. 2 out of 3 also had advanced degrees. They both had PhDs, which I think are really interesting. In terms of the college thing, right? Everyone asks, well, if you're homeschooled or unschooled, you don't have those transcripts, you don't have those test scores. So how do you get into college? And we found that 83%, were pursuing or had pursued higher education, and that there were many different paths to college acceptance, that there's not just one way to get into college. A lot of our learners used community college as a stepstone so that they had those transcripts. A lot of our learners just went and took the SATs and ACTs and really went and got their their portfolio from their families and met with the program director of the program and said, hey, I have an untraditional education, but here I am. So we found out that there were many different ways for college acceptance. Note that all of our respondents were employed except for those who are full-time students or caregivers, and 78% were completely financially independent. And I always think that was interesting, right? I think that's probably a higher number than most individuals. We tend to think that, gosh, if a kid's at home all day, are they going to become one of those kids who stays in the basement of their parents' house and just plays video games all day, right? And that's really not what we're looking at. There's been tons of interviews lately with college admissions officers, and interestingly, they're nodding to unschoolers. They want to know where to find them and where to get them. So like Harvard's Dean of Freshmen said, we've had a lot of success with students who identify as homeschooled. So I don't know if you can say that these are people who've only gotten their education within the 4 walls of their home, right? People know that homeschoolers more and more are really moving forward from a very curriculum-based realm and moving into a more strengths and interest-based realm, which takes them in many different places. I love this quote. I wish we had more time to explore our respondents' quotes, but this one unschooler who, unschooled throughout said the biggest advantage was that it smoothed the transition to adulthood instead of all of a sudden being thrown out into the real world of college and career. And this is because unschoolers generally live a very generalizable life. They're not just living in a school world that some people can say is an artificial environment, right? They're living in the real world all the time with all the benefits and also all the challenges. And so they get practice living in that world. I also think, it's the benefit, this unschooler said, unschooling gave me the immediate benefit of time and space to explore my interests and ask questions such as what kind of person am I? Who do I want to be? And those kinds of questions are questions we want all of our kids to be asking. Unschoolers just know that that's kind of part of the plan from the beginning. People do unschooling in different ways. So right now, very interesting, there's been a real surgence of world schoolers or people who unschool while traveling. And of course, COVID has stopped that somewhat, but we have a lot of unschoolers who were previously in the United States that, had to stay in the place that they were, wherever that is. So we have an increasing number of individuals world schooling. Outdoor schooling is something that especially even the New York City DOE has taken from unschoolers. We do a lot of outdoor schooling as unschoolers, and people have seen the benefits of that, especially in this COVID type environment. There's also a lot of unschooling co-ops around and self-directed learning centers, and I don't think they get the attention that they deserve. There are things like North Star in Massachusetts and Princeton Cooperative in New Jersey. There's a really interesting movie that just came out about the Natural Creativity Center in Pennsylvania called Unschooled, and it's been making its rounds at a lot of film festivals. And all these places take the tenets of unschooling and place them in a school. So you don't have to have a parent home, right? Because you send your kid to North Star, you send your kid to Princeton Cooperative. And so they are in a self-directed learning environment when they get to really explore freely their strengths and interests with no curriculum, but yet they're in a school space. I think that this is really going to be the future of education. I think there will be more, and there has been more self-directed learning centers popping up. And I think that we can take this model and replicate it in the future so that, again, more kids are getting this benefit of intrinsically motivated self-directed learning, which is so, so important. There are also public and private school extensions, right? So there's the national opt-out movement, a group of parents and teachers who have said no to standardized tests, knowing that that's not the key to success for anyone. There are these democratic or Sudbury schools popping up. I'm currently doing a study on the Hudson Valley Sudbury School in upstate New York. And again, these democratic schools work in a very interesting democratic structure, but they also have this, you can do whatever you want during the day, you go and explore your strengths and interests, and that is your schooling. Monument Mountain Regional High School is a really interesting model because this is a public high school. There was a student at this public high school called Sam Levin. Sam Levin was, going through the motions as a junior and saying, this is really great, but I wish I can work on a project that I wanted to work on or do things I loved for at least part of my day. So he asked a guidance counselor, can we make this happen? And the guidance counselor did. It's called the Independence Project. You can look it up. And it's a really interesting, one semester, half a day, half a high school day, The students in the independent project get to really go ahead and work on projects of their choosing. And so they learn in that way for half the school day, and then they take their classes. A colleague, David Lane, was someone who wanted to replicate what Monument Mountain Regional High School was doing, but couldn't. I mean, administration just couldn't do it. And I think most times when we look at our New York City public schools, administration is not going to be able to give a half a day to project-based or intrinsically motivated learning. So David asked for 1 period a day, right? Can I have 1 period a day where kids get to do what they want to do? And his administrator granted that. And there's some really cool stories that came in out of that 1 period a day that this teacher gave to work on independent projects. For those of us who work within high schools or have kids within high school, you know, if you think about the structure, this is their advisory period, right? Instead of advisory, they get to go ahead and they get to work on projects they love and dive deep into things that they're interested in, instead of always having to go through this set curriculum. And then there's High Tech High School, and you'll see the picture here, and it's this very large open spaced high school in California, where it's very, very focused on project-based learning based on a student's strengths and interests. Very, very focused on STEM, mathematical careers, and things like that. So there are schools that are doing this, that are taking the tenets of unschooling and moving it into a school-based platform. And again, I don't know how long it'll be, but I think when you're looking at these models, you are looking at the education of the future. You know, how we can extend, I mean, all unschoolers who've ever attended university will tell you that college and university spaces are exactly like what they did in an unschooling environment. They chose what they're interested in, they chose their classes, and they went ahead and did them. So when you're worried about transition with regards to homeschoolers and unschoolers, you really don't have to worry, right? Because unschoolers have been living the college life forever and ever. Um, and so, you know, it's all about, like, as college professors, do we increase independent study? Do we increase independent projects? How much time do we give to our students to study things they really love, to get really into it? Is our curriculum generalizable, right? Does our syllabus reflect things that our students can go out and then take and move into the real world and actually do it? This may, you know, be or result in more qualitatively assessed products. This may result in more self-directed Socratic seminars, which I know we love doing and which are absolutely possible in this remote online environment. I know Sarah, I don't know if she's here, but Sarah does like choose your own adventure assignments in her college class, which I think is incredible. And so here's a strand of work you can do, and here's a strand, choose your own adventure. And then there's the notion of civic and community engagement. You know, when kids are out there, and I think we've seen this during the pandemic, when kids are out there in the community in a different way, not in a school building, sometimes there's an increase in that community engagement, in that civic engagement. You get to know your neighborhood. You get to know what's going on in the world. You get to know the realm of politics because you're surrounded by it. So there's a lot of learning that can come from there. And of course, anytime we can do internships and apprenticeships, I mean, this is what unschooling is all about. This is what Ivan Illich talked about and like his ideal model of education. And of course, I think we as college professors are so lucky, right? Because we get to spend all day doing things that we love to do. And I think that that's really what unschooling is, right? It's allowing kids to, I want to say it's allowing kids to be college professors. It's allowing kids to get into this realm where we spend days doing what we love. And I think that's the most important thing. And again, the thing that attracted me most to this population. So I'm going to stop and pause. We're going to do some question answers. And then I have a giveaway. So we're going to give away a book, which I'm so excited about. So I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to see you all and your gorgeous faces.
Thank you, Gina. You can open it up. I'll try to look for, I see Roberta has a hand up already. And so we can use the participant raise your hand, or we can look to see if you physically have your hand up, but go ahead, Roberta, first.
I'm sorry, you were recognizing me, Paul?
Yeah, go ahead. I saw you had your hand up, so go ahead.
Gina, I really enjoyed your presentation. There's a lot in there that I think we can incorporate. My brother went to Bank Street in the 60s. It reminded me a lot of the open classroom that they were championing at the time, which also leads me to my concern. So my question has to do not with a multimodal approach, but unschooling, if you could say a pure approach to unschooling, okay? So I wanted to know a bit more about the demographics of both the children and the adults in your study, because my grandchildren are all, some of them are being homeschooled, some remote. So I was looking into unschooling as a, as a possible thing. And I really started to feel like unschooling was best suited for trust fund kids.
Yeah.
Where their families have the resources to expose them to a wide variety of things, and where, the kids can grow up without having to worry about the challenges they're going to face in the adult world, because they have the finances to bolster them. So that's kind of my question,
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. It's something I'm concerned about as well. So I'm going to do a disclosure, and then I'm going to do what research says, or actually I'm going to do what research says first. So the only large scale study we have on unschooling is those 232 families. And Dr. Gray and I are planning to redo this too, right? In 2013, mostly white participants, mostly two-parent families. In 2020, that is going to look very, very different. There has been a very conscious effort, as well as, again, like these huge diversity initiatives led by Akila and others to have more families of all descents come into the world of unschooling. And I think it's important, before we were like, well, how can they? You need to be rich to unschool. And this is where I'll self-disclose. So I unschooled my son. My son never went to school. He was unschooled forever. When I started unschooling, I was a poor young single parent. And I mean, like, I had $2.50 in my pocket. I was going to school, I was working, and I was unschooling my son. And so it absolutely is possible to do. And when people ask, like, how did you do it? I don't know. I mean, he's a great kid now. He's actually on this call. He's a great adult. He's 24 years old. He's in his second year at Hunter grad school, and he's a music educator. And, like, as a parent, I mean, he's a fantastic kid. The educational experiment worked. But I will say that this is something that we are watching. And again, there has been such increased diversity in the movement within the past 7 years, and I look forward to more. This is not just the realm of the two-parent white family.
Oh, thanks. I see Elizabeth. Why don't you go? Can you see them? Can you call?
Oh, sure.
Hi, wonderful presentation. Thank you. And I was so fascinated by the end when you were talking about how regular high schools were doing this as well. And my high school transitioned to that sort of work right near my senior year, and thank God. Otherwise, I wouldn't be where I am. I don't think I could have ever made it through traditional high school. And you know me, how quirky I am, so it works for me. But my question is, I taught school law for a while at the college level, at the post-grad level. And how does a parent report this, and how do they not get visited by the attendance teacher? and brought up on all kinds of charges. Because I worked for, a regular school system for a while, and I know that the attendance teacher was always going out and things like that. So I'm interested in the legal part.
Yeah. So this is something I lived through, right? So you have to register as a homeschooler, and most unschoolers are registered as homeschoolers in their state. State homeschooling regulations vary from state to state. So you're still registered as a homeschooler, you're still taking that attendance, and you're still providing resources for curriculum. But the resources you're providing might look different, right, from your everyday New York State curriculum. But as long as those resources and what you're doing every day matches what you're supposed to learn in that grade, it's generally no problem. And I've got to say, if a kid reads a newspaper every day, right, before they go out, or if a kid goes to a museum or goes to a library, or, explores the outdoor world, whether it be urban, suburban, or country, they're getting what they need. Right? If you go to the grocery store, you're learning math. If you buy things or ever purchase things, and so that gets reported within quarterly reports and then within an end of the year summary. At the end of the year in New York State, you have to test just like you have to test in schools. And I mean, that's something that unschoolers in New York State kind of have to swallow, right? You can try to refuse testing, but I mean, it depends on the district. Our district, we took the test every 2 years just because, right, our district required it. So that does, I mean, there's a lot of people within the self-directed learning world that want to rid states of those regulations, because it does not help in terms of if you want to unschool. But again, like, you can easily unschool with those regulations in place and your kid still gets to do what they do. And then,
Thank you.
Yeah. And then Christopher.
Hi.
Hi.
For what it's worth, I'm in a camper. I live in full-time in a tiny island in Portland, Oregon, and I teach for 4 different homeschools. I teach 3 different classes at Hunter. I do all sorts of stuff. I've been doing this for a while now. And right now, during your talk, which I really enjoyed, I'm teaching an urban planning class on Mars in Minecraft for a group of kids in Los Angeles. So everything you're saying is the future of everything. And I've worked in public schools. I've worked in private schools in New York for a long time. And honestly, the reward I get from teaching kids who come to me and pitch classes, and then I just take them on, it's just so much better in almost every conceivable metric. I'm always going back and forth with the people at Hunter that the classes that I used to teach in the classroom are far better online. I keep them focused. I can use much more modern tools like video games. I teach classes in Fortnite. I don't know if anybody's a gamer here, but honestly, you're talking about giving kids a real world representation. If you work in the real world, you're not meeting in classrooms. I have a WeWork account. So when I work in my normal places, I just go to WeWork in whatever city I'm in and I do everything virtually. And that's how most people work now. So I feel like I try to give my kids a representation of what the world is actually like. So I feel everything you're saying is already here and it's going to be the future. So thanks, I appreciate it. This is the first one of these I've attended because this isn't degraded into complaining and stuff. It seems much more optimistic, which is way more fun. I don't want to sit around with a bunch of old people yelling at each other. I want the future, that kind of thing. So thank you. I'm glad I came to this today.
Thanks so much for coming. Thanks for your comment too.
Sure.
Jillian, and then Annie.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. I had shared this with Gina before, but I am a new homeschooling parent. I have a 5th grader at home who has special needs in terms of education. And so, one of the reasons that we sort of shifted this year is because really his needs were not being met in public school. Even after we had, put in a lot of effort to advocate for him. So I'm curious to know, just from, the data you've collected, have you noticed that there have been some sort of equity gaps being filled in terms of, I'm asking right now in terms of disability, but I'm also sort of wondering too in terms of race. We know that that's a big issue in terms of equity, particularly in New York City. So I'm just curious to know, what your data is revealing about that. Oh, Gina, you're still muted.
Thanks. I really look forward to redoing and coming back to that large scale 2013 study, because I think there's been so much done to really erase those equity gaps that we did see at first, right? People were scared to unschool. Stereotype plays a lot into this, right? Everyone thinks it's the realm of the 2-parent rich family, and that's really not what it is. So we're working really hard in the self-directed learning community to really erase those equity gaps, for people to see unschooling as really a form of liberation, a way of, taking school and recreating it so that it is equitable. The self-directed learning centers you're seeing popping up is part of that movement, right? We know not everyone can stay at home, but you can send your child to a sliding scale self-directed learning center, and many of those self-directed learning centers are like, come in, we don't care about the tuition, we just want your kid to learn. We're seeing more and more people with kids with special needs come into unschooling, really as a way to heal, as a way to think about, maybe the existing school structure is part of or doesn't help the reason that, where disability happens. So I'm thinking of kids with ADHD or behavior disorders and things like that. So there's a lot of that work being done. We still always have far to go, but the work is being done and we're very conscious of it. Thanks for asking that question too, because I think that's important. Yeah, there's a lot of, oh, thanks, Logan. Hi, Annie, go for it.
Hi, Gina. It was great to hear you as always. So informative. And I just want to self-reveal as well. I was lucky enough to go to a public Montessori, and my daughter is currently at a public bilingual progressive school. And my question is, those are the big exceptions. I mean, I feel extremely lucky that that's my educational background and that by lottery, my daughter got into this school. So what do you think about how much effort to put in pushing the public school system to do more of this kind of education? Or do you feel like that's just kind of barking up the wrong tree? Just curious what you think about that.
No, I mean, it's always been my purpose, right? To come in and, introduce this type of education into the public school realm, because I think this is the one thing that will make public schools better. The more you can increase intrinsic motivation, self-determination, self-direction, especially, right, as Jillian said, in your students with special needs, but in all students, the better off the education is going to be. So I never mention the word unschooling to my New York City public school teachers because that's not helpful to them. But what I do stress is the concept of kids being self-determined, kids being self-directed, kids being intrinsically motivated, because that's something you can take in the schools to make schools better. And I do a lot of professional developments in that realm because I really think that's the secret. You haven't given up. Any other questions? Yeah, Alan.
Hi. So thank you. Really, really so interesting. And as always. So do you think that there's an age or a grade at which, well, it's too late to pursue something like this? I'm talking about, up to the end of high school. So
No.
even junior year, you can start pursuing this.
A lot of people are doing it junior year for a lot of reasons, especially because colleges like unique candidates, right? No, I think that there's no age. I think if you wanted to spend your senior year doing this or your junior year doing this, more power to you, because that's really the time when you want to experience the real world and experience what learning in the real world looks like. So yeah, no, my answer would have been different 10 years ago, but yeah, absolutely not. I think there's no age or grade.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Oh no, people have trouble with the poll.
Sorry, don't
worry about it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be too long to relaunch it. Sorry about that. We didn't put the scale in, so we'll take it as it is. But let's keep the conversation going. Sorry.
Yeah, no. And then I think we have time for one more question, and then I thank you so much. Gratitude for all of you, for your time, for being open to listening to this, for your wonderful, wonderful things that you do. Thank you. All right, I think we're good, Paul.
Great. Thanks again. How about another round of applause for Gina? So many things to think about and to connect to our own teaching, I think, as well, which is a whole nother bunch of discussions. So thank you for coming. Sorry about the poll. We forgot to put the scale in. So, but I think we have good qualitative data that it's successful, Gina. So we really appreciate it.
So will you be sending out links to the recording or to the PowerPoint?
We can, and Gina gave us your PowerPoint slides, right? So we'll add those as well. Someone had asked earlier if we'd have PowerPoint slides, so we'll add those to the CERT page. But I don't know if you want to, Gina. I don't know if you want to email anyone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can email the presenters. Oh, the book giveaway. Well, I'll email you. Darn.
You can do it right now. I mean, there's a couple people still on it.
All right, let's do it.
I wanted to do a book giveaway.
Sorry,
I should have forgot. I forgot to.
No, I totally forgot. I was all involved in the questions. Let's see, everybody. Let's see who's winning the book. I'm so excited
Gina
for you.
Made a wheel with everybody who registered its name.
I'll send it by mail.
So, where will it land?
Oh, do we have Kimberly? Was Kimberly here? Whoa, Kimberly, if you're here. I'll do one more just in case. Let's do one more. Try to think of the names I saw. I'll mail 2 books. That's fine. And Teresa. All right, so I have those names. Got those names.
Are they here? I don't think.
Teresa was definitely here. Kimberly, I don't know.
Shoot, I'm sorry I forgot about that. But anyways, yeah.
So fun.
I see Teresa's name at least.
Yeah, well, you get that.
You get a book.